This is Chapter 7 of the Heart of the Buddha's Teachings. Touching our suffering will be divided into two parts, Part A and Part B. In the Pali version of the discourse on turning the wheel of the Dharma, the Buddha told the 5 monks, as long as the insight and the understanding of these 4 noble truths in their 3 stages and 12 aspects, just as they are, had not been fully realized, I could not say that in this world, with its gods, maras, brahmas, recluses, brahmins, and men, someone had realized the highest awakening. Monks, as soon as the insight and understanding of the 4 noble truths in their 3 stages and 12 aspects, just as they are, had been realized, I could say that in this world, with its gods, maras, brahmas, recluses, brahmins, and men, someone had realized the highest awakening. In the Chinese version of the sutra, the Buddha said, monks, the experience of the 3 turnings of the wheel with regard to each of the 4 truths gives rise to eyes of awakened understanding, and therefore I declare before gods, spirits, Shraramas, and Brahmins of all times that I have destroyed all afflictions and reached full awakening. The wheel of the Dharma was put in motion 12 times, 3 for each of the 4 noble truths. To understand the 4 noble truths, not just intellectually, but experientially, we have to practice the 12 turnings of the wheel. The first turning is called recognition. We sense that something is wrong, but we are not able to say exactly what it is. We make some effort to escape, but we cannot. We try to deny our suffering, but it persists. The Buddha said that to suffer and not know that we are suffering is more painful than the burden endured by a mule carrying an unimaginably heavy load. We must, first of all, recognize that we are suffering and then determine whether its basis is physical, psychological, or physiological. Our suffering needs to be identified. Recognizing and identifying our suffering is like the monk, I'll repeat that. Recognizing and identifying our suffering is like the work of a doctor diagnosing an illness. He or she says, if I press here, does it hurt? And we say, yes, this is my suffering. This has come to be. The wounds in our heart become the object of our meditation. We show them to our doctor, and we show them to the Buddha, which means we show them to ourselves. Our suffering is us, and we need to treat it with kindness and non-violence. We need to embrace our fear, hatred, anguish, and anger. My dear suffering, I know you are there. I am here for you, and I will take care of you. We stop running from our pain. With all our courage and tenderness, we recognize, acknowledge, and identify it. The second turning of the wheel is called encouragement. After recognizing and identifying our pain, we take the time to look deeply into it, and in order to understand its true nature, which means its causes. After observing our symptoms, the doctor says, I will look deeply into it, This illness can be understood. It may take him a week to conduct tests and inquire about what we have been eating, our attitudes, how we spend our time, and so on. But he is determined to understand our illness, our suffering, depression, illness, a difficult relationship, or fear needs to be understood, and like a doctor, we are determined to understand it. We practice sitting and walking meditation. We ask for guidance and support from our friends and, if we have one, our teacher. As we do this, we see that the causes of our suffering are knowable, and we make every effort to get to the bottom of it. At this stage, our practice can still be set back. And there's a word here in brackets in Pali, I guess, ashrava. Next, the third turning of the wheel is called realization and can be expressed as, this suffering has been understood. We realize the efforts begin during the second turning. The doctor tells us the name and all the characteristics of our illness. After studying, reflecting upon, and practicing the first noble truth, we realize that we have stopped running away from our pain. We can now call our suffering by its specific name and identify all of its characteristics. This alone brings us happiness, joy, without setbacks. Anashrava. Still, after we have successfully diagnosed our ailment, for a time we continue to create suffering for ourselves. We pour gasoline on the fire through our words, thoughts, and deeds, and often don't even realize it. The first turning of the wheel of the second noble truth is the recognition. I am continuing to create suffering. The Buddha said, when something has come to be, we have to acknowledge its presence and look deeply into its nature. When we look deeply, we will discover the kinds of nutrients that have helped it come to be and that continue to feed it. He then elaborated 4 kinds of nutriments that can lead to our happiness or our suffering: edible food, sense impressions, intention, and consciousness. The first nutriment is edible food. What we eat or drink can bring about mental or physical suffering. We must be able to distinguish between what is healthful and what is harmful. We need to practice right view when we shop, cook, and eat. The Buddha offered this example. A young couple and their 2-year-old child were trying to cross the desert, and they ran out of food. After deep reflection, the parents realized that in order to survive, they had to kill their son and eat his flesh. They calculated that if they ate such and such a portion of their baby's flesh each day and carried the rest on their shoulders to dry, it would last the rest of the journey. But with every morsel of their baby's flesh they ate, the young couple cried and cried. After he told this story, the Buddha asked, "Dear friends, do you think the young man and woman enjoyed eating their son's flesh?" "No, Lord, it would not be possible for them to enjoy eating their son's flesh." The Buddha said, "Yet many people eat the flesh of their parents, their children, and their grandchildren, and do not know it. Much of our suffering comes from not eating mindfully, We have to learn ways to eat that preserve the health and well-being of our body and our spirit. When we smoke, drink, or consume toxins, we are eating our own lungs, liver, and heart. If we have children and do these things, we are eating our children's flesh. Our children need us to be healthy and strong. We have to look deeply to see how we grow our food so we can eat in ways that preserve our collective well-being, minimize our suffering and the suffering of other species, and allow the earth to continue to be a source of life for all of us. If, while we eat, we destroy living beings or the environment, we are eating the flesh of our own sons and daughters. We need to look deeply together and discuss how to eat, what to eat, and what to resist. This will be a real Dharma discussion. The second kind of nutriment is sense impressions. Our six sense organs, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, are in constant contact. And that word is sparsha, with sense objects, and these contacts become food for our consciousness. When we drive through a city, our eyes see so many billboards, and these images enter into our consciousness. When we pick up a magazine, the articles and advertisements are food for our consciousness. Advertisements that stimulate our craving for possessions, sex, and food can be toxic. If, after reading the newspaper, hearing the news, or being in a conversation, we feel anxious or worn out, we know we have been in contact with toxins. Movies are food for our eyes, ears, and minds. When we watch TV, the program is our food. Children who spend 5 hours a day watching television are ingesting images that water the negative seeds of craving, fear, anger, and violence in them. We are exposed to so many forms, colors, sounds, smells, taste, objects of touch, and ideas that are toxic and rob our body and consciousness of their well-being. When you feel despair, fear, or depression, it may be because you have ingested too many toxins through your sense impressions. Not only children need to be protected from violent and unwholesome films, TV programs, books, magazines, and games, we too can be destroyed by these media. If we are mindful, we will know whether we are ingesting the toxins of fear, hatred, and violence, or eating foods that encourage understanding, compassion, and the determination to help others. With the practice of mindfulness, we will know that hearing this, looking at that, or touching this, we feel light and peaceful, while hearing that, looking at this, or touching that, we feel anxious, sad, or depressed. As a result, we will know what to be in contact with and what to avoid. Our skin protects us from bacteria. Antibodies protect us from internal invaders. We have to use the equivalent aspects of our consciousness to protect us from unwholesome sense objects that can poison us. The Buddha offered this drastic image. There is a cow with such a terrible skin disease that her skin is almost no longer there. When you bring her close to an ancient wall or old tree, all the living creatures in the bark of the tree come out, cling to the cow's body, and suck. When we bring her into the water, the same thing happens. Even when she is just exposed to air, tiny insects come and suck. Then the Buddha said, "This is our situation also." We are exposed to invasions of all types: images, sounds, smells, touch, ideas, and many of these feed the craving, violence, fear, and despair in us. The Buddha advised us to post a sentinel, namely mindfulness, at each of our sense doors to protect ourselves. Use your Buddha eyes to look at each nutriment you are about to ingest. If you see that it is toxic, refuse to look at it. Listen to it, taste it, or touch it. Ingest only what you are certain is safe. The 5 mindful trainings, and there's a little footnote about those, says, see Tish Nhat Hanh for a future to be possible. Commentaries on the 5 mindfulness trainings. And then return to the text now. The 5 mindfulness trainings can help very much. We must come together as individuals, families, cities, and a nation to discuss strategies of self-protection and survival. To get out of the dangerous situation we are in, the practice of mindfulness has to be collective. The third kind of nutriment is volition, intention, or will. The desire in us to obtain whatever it is that we want. Volition is the ground of all of our actions. If we think that the way for us to be happy is to become president of a large corporation, everything we do or say will be directed towards realizing that goal. Even when we sleep, our consciousness will continue to work on it. Or suppose we believe that all of our suffering and the suffering of our family has been brought about by someone who wronged us in the past. We believe we will only be happy if we inflict harm on that person. Our life is motivated solely by the desire for revenge. And everything we say, everything we plan, is to punish that person. At night we dream of revenge, and we think this will liberate us from our anger and hatred. Everyone wants to be happy, and there's a strong energy in us pushing us toward what we think will make us happy. But we may suffer a lot because of this. We need the insight that position, revenge, wealth, fame, or possessions are, more often than not, obstacles to our happiness. We need to cultivate the wish to be free of these things so we can enjoy the wonders of life that are always available. Blue sky, the trees, our beautiful children. After 3 months or 6 months of mindful sitting, mindful walking, and mindful looking, a deep vision of reality arises in us, and the capacity of being there, enjoying life in the present moment, liberates us from all impulses and brings us real happiness. One day after the Buddha and a group of monks finished eating lunch mindfully together, a farmer, very agitated, came by and asked, "Monks, have you seen my cows? I don't think I can survive so much misfortune." The Buddha asked him, "What happened?" And the man said, "Monks, this morning all 12 of my cows ran away, and this year my whole crop of sesame plants was eaten by insects." The Buddha said, "Sir, we have not seen your cows. Perhaps they have gone in the other direction." And the farmer went off in that direction. And the Buddha turned to his Sangha and said, "Dear friends, do you know you are the happiest people on earth? You have no cows or sesame plants to lose. We always try to accumulate more and more, and we think these cows are essential for our existence. In fact, they may be the obstacles that prevent us from being happy. Release your cows and become a free person. Release your cows so you can be truly happy. The Buddha presented another drastic image. Two strong men are dragging a third man along in order to throw him into a fire pit. He cannot resist, and finally they throw him into the glowing embers. These strong men, the Buddha said, are our own volition. We don't want to suffer, but our deep-seated habit energies drag us into the fire of suffering. The Buddha advised us to look deeply into the nature of our volition to see whether it is pushing us in the direction of liberation, peace, and compassion, or in the direction of suffering and unhappiness. We need to be able to see the kinds of intention food that we are consuming. That is the end of this half of the chapter. We will continue the next in part B.